You are walking down the street, completely in control of your life. You have places to be. A schedule. You are a functioning adult with responsibilities and a reasonable degree of self-discipline. Then someone walks past you with a small dog. Not even a remarkable dog. Just a dog. Regular size, regular face, regular fur. And something happens that you did not authorize. Your stride slows. Your head turns. Your hand, operating independently of your conscious brain, starts to rise. Before you've made any decision, you've stopped walking, crouched down to pavement level, and started making sounds you never make in a business meeting, whispering, "Oh, who are you?" and look at your little face to an animal that has no idea what you're saying and is a little confused about why a stranger is now 4 inches from its nose. You are completely out of control. And the strange part is, you already knew you were going to do this. You saw the dog, and on some level you knew. The hand was going up. The voice was going soft. The schedule was becoming irrelevant. Why? Not the vague answer. Because dogs are cute. Because I'm a dog person. The actual why. The biological, neurological, evolutionary why that explains not just why you pet animals, but why you literally cannot stop yourself. Why the urge arrives before the thought. Why it overrides your schedule, your dignity, your awareness that the dog's owner is watching you make increasingly unhinged noises at their pet. Because this is not a preference. It's not a personality trait. It's a compulsion, running on hardware that is millions of years old, and it's stranger and more fascinating than you've ever been told. Let's get into it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the urge to touch cute animals, and it's the most important thing to understand before anything else. It is not a decision. By the time you're consciously aware that you want to pet the dog, you've already started petting the dog. The behavior has initiated. The hand is already moving. What you experience as a desire is actually your conscious mind catching up to something your motor system began doing about half a second earlier. This has been measured. Research on approach motivation, what happens when the brain identifies something as potentially rewarding and starts generating movement toward it, consistently shows that motor initiation precedes conscious awareness of the desire. Your brain identifies the stimulus, registers it as rewarding, and starts moving you toward it. Then, a fraction of a second later, you become aware that you want to do the thing you're already doing. You were never in charge here. The part of your brain that handles fast, automatic, reward-seeking behavior got there first. The part that generates your sense of being a rational agent with dignity arrived to find the hand already on its way up. That's because cute animals don't gently nudge your reward system, they override it. They hit every layer of the brain's reward and approach circuitry at once. Here's what happens, in order, in the roughly 2 seconds between you seeing the dog and finding yourself crouched on the pavement. First, your visual system identifies the key features: large eyes relative to head size, round face, small nose, soft curves instead of hard angles, short limbs, a disproportionately large head. These are the features the ethologist Konrad Lorenz identified in 1943 and called kinderschema, baby schema, the visual fingerprint of infancy. Lorenz understood that these features didn't just produce a feeling, they triggered a specific, automatic caregiving response in adult humans, one that evolved to make adults bond to and protect infants. A response that fires whether the infant-featured thing in front of you is an actual baby or a golden retriever. Your visual cortex processes these features and immediately signals the amygdala and orbitofrontal cortex. The amygdala evaluates emotional significance. The orbitofrontal cortex handles reward value. Both flag this as important, worth moving toward, worth engaging with right now. Then the dopamine starts. Dopamine isn't, as popular science often gets wrong, a pleasure chemical. It's an anticipation chemical, released not when you receive a reward, but when your brain predicts one is coming. Cute animals are extraordinary dopamine triggers because they promise rewards across multiple systems at once: soft texture, warm contact, gentle movement, positive social interaction. That promise arrives before you've touched anything, before you've even fully decided to approach. You did not choose to want to pet the dog. Your brain made that choice, told your motor system, started moving your body, and informed your conscious mind as a courtesy. You are the last to know. Here's where it gets deeper. The compulsive quality of this urge, the way it overrides your conscious agenda and moves your body before you've decided anything, isn't a glitch. It's the system working exactly as designed. Mammals are born entirely dependent on caregivers. Unlike species that can walk or swim within hours of birth, mammalian infants require prolonged, intensive physical care, feeding, warmth, protection, contact. Without it, they don't survive. That's not a soft generalization, it's biological fact. So evolution had a specific problem to solve. How do you make adults reliably, almost compulsively motivated to approach, hold, and care for small helpless creatures? You build it into the hardware. You make approaching small, soft, helpless things feel so rewarding that the impulse is hard to ignore. You make contact release neurochemicals powerful enough that the behavior reinforces itself every time it happens. You make it a compulsion. Then you make the trigger broad enough to fire reliably: round face, big eyes, soft texture, small size, helpless movement. These features show up in human infants, which is what the system evolved to detect. But they also show up in dogs, cats, rabbits, and anything else sharing enough of that infant profile. Evolution didn't build a precise, species-specific trigger. It built a wide one, because infants look different from each other and change as they grow. A narrow system would fail constantly. That wide margin is why you're now 30 seconds late for work because you stopped to say hello to a stranger's dachshund. You're not failing to control a preference. You're being operated by a system that's millions of years old, responsible for the survival of every mammal that's ever lived, and specifically built to be hard to override. You were never going to win this one. But it doesn't stop at the visual. Because the impulse to touch is its own separate system, with its own reward pathways and its own reasons for targeting soft, warm fur specifically. Your skin isn't a uniform sensory surface. It contains different receptor types tuned to different qualities of touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, pain, texture, and one type most people have never heard of: see tactile afferents. These are slow-conducting nerve fibers across your hairy skin, almost perfectly tuned to one particular kind of touch: gentle, slow, stroking contact, moving about 1 to 10 centimeters per second, at roughly skin temperature, with light, consistent pressure. They're not tuned to firm pressure or sharp sensation with that specificity. They exist for this one thing. And when they fire, they don't mainly send signals to the somatosensory cortex, which processes where and how you're being touched. They send signals to regions involved in emotion, social bonding, and reward, the insula, areas tied to affective processing. They're the biological basis of social touch. The reason a slow, gentle stroke feels meaningful in a way a firm pat doesn't. Running your hand across warm, soft fur is an almost perfect match for the stimulus these fibers are tuned to. Your skin is telling your brain, in the most direct terms available, that you're engaged in meaningful social touch with a living being. Oxytocin releases. Cortisol drops. Heart rate slows. Your nervous system recognizes the warmth and gentle resistance of what you're touching and downregulates its threat response. This is safe. This is alive. Everything is fine. The animal is having a parallel experience, the same oxytocin loop. Studies measuring oxytocin in both humans and dogs during interaction consistently shows simultaneous spikes in both. You walked up to a stranger's dog, and you both, independently, fell a little in love. That mutual bonding is the direct descendant of the mechanism that let mammalian parents and infants bond deeply enough that a parent would sacrifice almost anything to protect a child. What's happening between you and the dog runs on the same circuitry as the deepest parental love in the mammalian world. It's not a pale imitation of real bonding, it's real bonding, misfired onto a different species, using some of the most powerful machinery the mammalian brain contains. Now let's get specific about the compulsive part, the piece that actually answers why you can't stop. You know you should ask before approaching the dog. You've seen the cat's clear signal that it doesn't want to be touched right now. You know the hamster belongs to your colleague's kid, not you. And yet, two overlapping mechanisms explain this, and most explanations skip them entirely. The first is wanting versus liking. These sound like synonyms. They aren't, and the difference matters in addiction neuroscience. Liking is the pleasure of an experience. Wanting is the drive toward it. They're handled by different systems that can decouple from each other. Wanting is mostly dopaminergic, driven by anticipation. Liking runs more on opioid systems, the actual pleasure of the experience itself. The approach impulse, the thing moving your hand toward the animal, comes from the dopaminergic anticipation system, and it fires before contact. Once you make contact and the experience begins, the opioid system takes over to process the pleasure. But the wanting system doesn't switch off when the liking begins. It keeps running in parallel. It's forward-looking. It wants the next moment of reward, not the one you're having. It's always pointing slightly ahead. That's why contact never quite satisfies the urge. You don't pet the dog once and feel resolved. You keep petting because the system that drove you to start is a forward-running anticipation mechanism that doesn't stop just because the reward has arrived. The second mechanism is what Yale researchers called cute aggression. A term that sounds alarming but is actually fascinating. It's the strange, intense urge that shows up alongside the positive response to something overwhelmingly cute. The impulse to squeeze, to say I could eat you, to aggressively scrunch a puppy's face with both hands even though you have zero intention of hurting it. The researchers found this isn't random or alarming. It looks like a regulatory response. When the brain receives more positive emotional input than it's easily managing, it generates a countervailing impulse to restore balance, a pressure valve. The intensity of the urge you feel toward cute animals is essentially a direct measure of how overwhelming the positive emotion is. You're not failing to control yourself. You're experiencing your brain's response to something genuinely exceeding its normal processing capacity. Here's the piece that reframes everything. This compulsion isn't a human invention, not cultural, not modern. It's ancient. Far older than our species. Observations of non-human primates, in the wild and in captivity, document cross-species approach behavior with no obvious survival function. Capuchin monkeys gently handling small animals they could easily kill but don't. Great apes in captivity forming affectionate, tactile relationships with dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, not because of any trained reward, but because proximity and contact with those animals produces something they seek out again and again. Coco, the gorilla who learned American Sign Language, requested a cat about a year into the research project. She was given one, named it herself, All Ball, and handled her with consistent gentleness. When All Ball was killed by a car, Coco produced signs researchers interpreted as grief. She later requested, and received, 2 more cats. A gorilla mourning a small domestic cat, because touching it had produced something real in her, something she sought again after losing it. This drive, for contact with small, soft, warm, living things, isn't running in us because of how we were raised. It's running because touch is one of the most fundamental ways mammals communicate safety to each other. Before language, before any of our other cognitive tools, there was touch, and touch communicated something nothing else could: alive, warm, here, safe. You're not hardwired to respond to dogs and cats because you grew up around them. You're hardwired to respond to anything carrying the sensory signature of a small, warm, alive, non-threatening living being, because that signature meant something for millions of years before there were dogs and cats and bunnies. It meant you weren't alone. This is the part that makes all of this more than a fascinating quirk. Touch deprivation is a documented, measurable physiological stressor. Not a vague feeling of loneliness, a measurable change in stress hormones, immune function, and cardiovascular and neurological health. Infants who get adequate nutrition and physical care but insufficient touch fail to thrive in ways that go far beyond bonding. They grow more slowly. They're more vulnerable to illness. Touch is a biological signal about whether the environment is safe and whether it's appropriate to invest energy in growth, not just the comfort. This extends across the lifespan. Adults deprived of consistent physical contact show elevated baseline cortisol, poor immune function, higher rates of depression and anxiety, and impaired wound healing, physiological markers of chronic stress that persist as long as the deprivation continues. This is where the animals come back in. Pet owners show better health outcomes across multiple markers, and researchers have tried to isolate whether that's about companionship in the abstract or about the physical contact specifically. The evidence increasingly points to the contact itself. People who physically interact with animals, petting them, feeling them settle into their laps, show measurable cortisol reductions and oxytocin increases in as little as 10 to 15 minutes. Your body doesn't need long to respond, because this isn't a learned response. It's a recognition, something your nervous system has been primed for longer than you've existed as a species. Hospital patients receiving animal-assisted therapy report lower pain and anxiety before procedures. Children with access to therapy animals show lower physiological stress during high-pressure situations. The research is consistent across populations, contexts, and species of therapy animal. We're not built for the level of physical separation from other living things that most modern humans now live with. The walls, the schedules, the professional contexts that make it inappropriate to touch anything soft and alive for most of the day, these are cosmically recent. The nervous system hasn't adapted to them. It's still expecting close proximity to other living things, consistent physical contact, the weight of something alive settling against you. You weren't designed to go a full workday without touching something soft and alive. The urge you feel when you see the dog on the street is your body noticing that deficit and grabbing the chance to correct it. So let's put this together. When you see a cute animal and feel the urge to touch it arrive before you've made any decision, that's your dopaminergic approach system identifying a high-value reward and initiating movement before your conscious mind has been consulted. Fast, efficient, evolutionarily ancient decision-making that correctly identified something important. When your hand makes contact and something releases in your chest that you didn't know was tense, that's the tactile afferents firing, oxytocin releasing, cortisol dropping, your nervous system receiving exactly the input it was built to receive and doing exactly what it was built to do with it. When you can't stop, when one pat becomes 5, becomes you sitting on someone's front steps petting their dog for 12 minutes while your coffee goes cold, that's the forward-running anticipation system doing what anticipation systems do, never fully resolving, always pointing slightly ahead, always generating one more unit of motivation toward the next moment of contact. And when you make the sounds you never make in a professional context, when you say who's the best boy in a voice you didn't choose and can't fully explain, that's a system older than language generating its own form of communication. Something warm and alive and non-threatening is here. Signal that it's welcome. Signal, in every way available, including ways that bypass your professional dignity, that this moment is good. You can't stop yourself from touching cute animals for the same reason you can't stop yourself from breathing after holding your breath. The need is that fundamental. The system is that old. The machinery is that powerful. You're not overreacting to a dog on the street. You're running 2 million years of mammalian wiring designed to make you reach toward small, warm, soft, living things, and you're running it correctly. The only part that's actually yours is the 30-second apology to the dog's owner afterward, for being, as you put it, a little much. Everything else? That was always going to happen.